with Amud HaTefilah, the pillar of prayer for the Baal Shem Tov in Ois Tes Sign, entry 16. So the Baal Shem Tov is now going to talk about the process of how a person enters into heightened states and higher states of consciousness. In general, before we get into the actual text, in general, as we spoke about in the previous weeks, there is the way the philosophers, the Chokern, talk about the process of creation. That the process of creation begins first as a chomer, a substance, then it's sur, then a form, and then tikkun, and then it's completion. Or as some of the Rishonim write, other of the early commentators write, that it begins as a process of first Olam al-Gangalim, the world of Olam al-Malachim, the world of angels, then the world of Galgalim, the world of celestial spheres, the world of angels, the world of celestial spheres, and then Olam HaShafal, the physical world. In Sifra Kabbalah, in the language of Kabbalah, Sifra Side, so it talks about four worlds. So that these parallel the three worlds is Bri, Yitzir, Asiya, creation, formation, and actualization. The process of creation is the world of substance, Bria. The process of formation, Yitzira, is the world of formation, of Tzura is formation, and the process of Tikkun, the finality of it, is the world of Asiya, physicality. So this is the process of creation, and above that means higher than that. It's not physically above. It's not a spatial thing. Above that, or inward, on a higher level, a higher realm, or deeper realm, with an inner realm, is the world, the reality of Atzilus, which is the world of unification, emanator, and emanation. In the teachings of the Arizal, when he talks about, for example, the morning davening, Shacharis, so the Arizal talks about that davening Shacharis is divided into four parts. The morning prayers are divided into four parts. And the four parts correspond also to the four steps, rungs that Yaakov experiences in his dream. Sulam Mutzavartz Rosh Megiah Shamayma, that he's standing on the earth and the ladder reaches heaven, which is the process of prayer. So Tefillah, the idea of prayer. Gematria Sinai, the idea of the idea of davening, of prayer. And the four rungs correspond to the four worlds, and the division of davening itself, the Shachris itself, is divided into these four realms. The first part of davening, which is Birchas HaShachar, the morning blessings, which speaks about the physicality and blessing Hashem for the physical functions of the body and for clothes and for physical things that a person has, corresponds to the world of Asiya, the physical world, and then the world of Yitzira, which is the emotional world. The world of formation is connected to the Halukos, Psukkah Dezimra, the verses of praise. Shema, which is much more subtle, is the world of Bria, which is intellect. And then Shemona Esrei, the Amida, when a person gets to the peak of prayer, that is the level of Atzilus. And then there's even a higher level, which is Tachnun, which is after Atzilus. But the way the Arizal speaks about it is that there are four stages, and a person moves through these four stages as a person is davening, as a person is praying, deeper and deeper into the four stages. One of the wonderful chidushim, one of the great novelties of the teachings of the Baal Shem, is that the Baal Shem Tov explained not only that it's true, but it wished to explain how this process is possible. How a person, through davening, could actually go through these four stages, inward stages, moving from the world of Asiya, the physicality, which is the most manifest world, the world we observe empirically with our eyes, to get into a higher level of state of consciousness, which is the world of Atzilus. The experience of a level of Atzilus, the world of unity, would be when a person is able to pray and to think with clarity, with klarkeit. When a person is able to think with clarity, and there's no bilbul, there's no confusion of any other foreign thoughts or negative thoughts or intruding thoughts that are occurring, and a person is able to think through a process of thought clearly, with clarity, that's a level of atzilus within. That's a level of clarity, a level of inwardness that a person experiences. It should be understood that these four realms are realms, each one of these four levels has these four levels within them. So when we talk about a person experiencing Atzilus, the highest level of consciousness, of being, of reality, of unity, it's not necessarily the Atzilus of the level of Atzilus, but it's possible to have an experience of Atzilus within Asiya, which means a type of clarity and openness and expansiveness within the physical realm. But ultimately the goal is to get into Atzilus of Atzilus, or however that is understood, and to experience it, not to get there, it's not a location, to experience this sense of unity, of sense of oneness, of being an instrument through the divine will to flow through a person. But even if a person doesn't reach that state, during davening, this is also a process that you could experience Atzilus, that level of unity within the world of Bria, or within the world of Asiya, within the physical realm. And the idea is to have this during the process of davening, during the process of prayer, to have this type of hispashtus hagashmius, a divestment of physicality, a divestment of the gravity pull of physicality, which means a lightness of being. This is actually, this idea is really hinted to already in the Gemara, the Mishnah, where it says that they would wait, they would settle their minds, like the Rambam writes, that they would quiet their minds an hour before they would pray. And the way it's brought down in the Rishonim, and later it's quoted by the Tur, in Shulchan Aruch Tzadik Ches, that the Tur writes, and it's brought down from the earlier commentators, earlier Rishonim, that a person, when they're daven, has to experience a type of hispashtus hagashmes, a divestment of physicality. I mean, it means a person enters into a state where their guiding principles, if you wish, or their sensations is not about the immediate and the physicality of the person, of the self, but a person has some type of lift, some type of transcendence from the immediate urgency, the immediate needs of the body. This is a type of hispashtus. Hispashtus means a type of divestment. The state that a person can reach when a person is in a state of divestment is what is called dveikus, is called unity. That's a mitzvah of Torah. That's a mitzvah of Torah to have dveikus. There's a mitzvah to have dveikus, to experience dveikus, to experience that unity, to be davek on Kadosh Baruch Hu, also through Chiyaf Davek Kadosh Baruch Hu. We can also be davek Talmid Chachamim and davek through his ma'asim, but also the idea, the essential idea is dveikus, to feel that sense of unity. And in that state, when a person is transcendent of the sensations of the body and also the sensations of his emotions, and also the sensations of the ego, then the person becomes a perfect medium through which there can be a higher type of revealing. Again, that would be the level of Atzilus, that type of clarity. And if it's not Atzilus of Atzilus, it could be even for a person that's still beginning, or someone that doesn't have developed this potential, it could be Atzilus within Asiya. There can be that type of clarity and openness and expansiveness within the world of even the world within Asiya. That's why the word tzaddikim, especially Hasidic masters, but also tzaddikim that goes back even before that. Like, for example, the Shinover that says that says that you cannot teach Torah. You should not teach Torah something that you already prepared before. We're not talking about if you have to give a shir on a particular Gemara, which obviously you have to prepare, but if you want to give over Torah a certain type of inspiration, a type of revealing of Torah, you have to put the ego aside. And in order to put the ego aside, you can't prepare and say, okay, this is what I'm going to appear to say, and then what if the crowd is, the people that you're trying to tell them to tell your ideas are not reciprocating or not recipient to those ideas. So then it's just about your ego trying to say something. You have an idea, and it's maybe a smart idea, and you're trying to say it, but really you have to just become a conduit. This is a high level. There's also many Hasidic rabbis, we know stories that, for example, the story of the Tzemach Tzedek, that the Tzemach Tzedek, the third Chabad Rebbe, once said a Hasidic discourse, once said a mimer, and after the mimer there was an argument between Rabbi Hillel Paracher, the Rabbi Marash, exactly what the Tzemach Tzedek meant between these two students, and one of his a student and a son of his, who later became the next Rebbe. And they were arguing what the Tzemach Tzedek meant when he said what he said during the mimer, during the discourse. And so they decided to go into the Rebbe himself, to go into the Tzemach Tzedek. And they asked the Tzemach Tzedek, and the Tzemach Tzedek sided with the Rabbi Marash, said that the Rabbi Marash is correct. That's what I wanted to say. And Rabbi Hillel Paracher said that he could still argue with that. In other words, even though Tzemach Tzedek is originated of the thought, and he said that what I meant to say before was so and so, Rabbi Hillel said, but still I can argue with you, because before, when you were saying the mimer, you were a conduit. You were just revealing the Divrei Elokim Chaim, the word of Hashem, in a presence and an experience, a minor experience of Matan Torah, receiving the Torah, revealing of the Torah, and it wasn't about you. And now you're no longer in that state, kaviyachol, as if. So now it's just two intelligent people talking about an idea that was said. So me and you could argue, which is the idea that the Rebbe is the perfect, the Shem of the Atzilus, the soul of Atzilus, and that state of Atzilus, and he's bringing down the Torah. That he's a conduit. There's no ego involved. There's no me in the process. It's passing through him. They say also about the Moranayim, that the Moranayim, that Reb Nachum Schnabel, the great Hasidic Rebbe, a student of the Baal Shem Tov also, and a student of the Maggid, that the Sefer Moranayim, which is a lichtige Sefer, a very holy book, that the Moranayim only wrote down the Torah that he printed in the Moranayim, only the Torah, which is like 1/5 of the Torah that he said on Shabbos, and he only wrote down the Torah that he didn't remember after Shabbos, that had to be told to him. Anything that he remembered, which means that he thought about it while he was saying it, he said that's not the pure Torah, that has to be written. They say a story also about the Dinaver, that the Bnei Yissaschar, which is a grandparent of my children, that the Bnei Yissaschar was once speaking, and after the Rebbes used to speak, and then later there was a chazar, there was a repetition, that to repeat what the Rebbe would say. So the Dinaver once said that that if a person does an action to impress another person, let's say a person does a kindness so another person should see you're such a good guy, or a person gives charity so people think you're charitable, so the Dinaver said that after 120, Lamaila, when a person passes on, the high court, the heavenly court is going to say, if you're looking for a reward for that particular action that you took, since you did it to impress the other person, ask the other person for the reward. That's what he said. And later on, the Talmud and the students of the Dinaver repeated to the Rebbe, to the Dinaver, what he said, and the Dinaver said, I said that, which is a story which is doubly deep, because he's saying a Torah about not saying a Torah to impress other people, which means that's the idea of it coming through. But this is just a general concept of, to get to that, to speak from that space, to speak from a place of egolessness and non-attachment to the physical, and ispashtus, which is ultimately the idea of to speak davening, to speak the word of tefillah, and like the Baal Shem says, Torah, and like the Moranayim also writes, in Parshas Chukas, it doesn't mean Torah, it means just in general life to speak, which obviously Torah and Tefillah is inclusive of everything, that a person should speak from that place of dveikus, from that place of unity. But how does a person reach this madrega? How does a person reach this level? So again, in the teachings of the Arizal, and the teachings of the early Mukabalim, the early Kabbalists, a lot of the ways that a person would reach these states, where there was a lot of fasting and going to the mikveh and chanting certain names and scanning certain yichudim of different names of Hashem. There are many different practices that were done. But the Baal Shem Tov is going to reveal a process which is going to be very simple, not saying that a person should not go to the mikveh. Of course, a person should go to the mikveh. But it's also the way the Baal Shem Tov discusses this and reveals this truth is that it's something that's very applicable, and it's using very visceral tools, very almost the tools of the body. One of the ways in general that people had these types of more transcendent experiences of type of ispashtus agashmi, which is the divestment of the physicality, of the corporality, is through the repetition of sound. Either it's a repetition of the exact same sound, or just a repetition of a type of sound, a certain type of, whether it can be in a nigun, whether it actually can be in a song, or a particular sound. In the book, Sound of Vibration, this is discussed in great length, which is maybe maybe it's worth getting that book, Sound of Vibration. But the idea of a repetition of a particular sound and a type of vibration. Famously, Rabbi Avram Balafia, a famous Mekumal that was born in 1240, a famous Mekumal in Spain, that speaks about using the vowels and the letters of the Torah, and the Hebrew letters, and the letters of the name of Hashem. Ablafi himself is for another discussion. The Rajba wrote very harsh words about the Raj on Abulafia, and later the Chait also Merachas Alakusos writes very harsh words. But it turns out that over history, many of the teachings of Abulafia was already written down by Ramesh Kadaver, the Ramak, in Pardes. In the Pardes he quotes long pieces from Chaya Lom Haba. And then later, Rav Chaim Vital brings him down very much in the fourth part of Shari Kedusha Chelik Dalad, long pieces from Chaya Lom Haba and other books of that Abulafia writes. And the idea is through repetition of a particular sound. This is similar to also what the Beis Yosef did, which in the Hakdama of Magam Yesharim, Rabbi Yosef Karo, the Alkabatz writes about Rabbi Yosef Karo chanting Mishnah together with him, repeating the Mishnah over and over again, or the way the Rav Chaim Vital writes in Shari Kedusha that b'mehiras tkufa zulazu, like you read the Mishnah very quickly over and over, and somehow this allowed them to enter into higher states. So the idea of a type of repetition of something, or a repetition of a particular sound, would allow them to be induced to a higher state of consciousness. We're going to see soon that the Baal Shem Tov uses this technique, but in a much more simple way. Not in the Mishnah, and not with sirufim, with sacred names of Hashem, but in a much more simple way. So sound itself, sort of the slow movement of sound, or the repetition of that particular one sound, allows a person to enter into a more sleepy state, like a little bit transcendent of the rush of the activity that goes on in the mind. This is also brought down in Chazal. The Gemara itself says that. The Gemara in Erev and Kufdal speaks about a drip of water that's dripping on a vessel, in order to help a person fall asleep. The Magen Avraham actually quotes this in Orach Chaim as well, in Shin Lamed Ches, that in Shabbos, the Magen Avraham talks about whether a person is allowed to put a vessel under dripping water to create a sound, and that sound, that continuous sound, will help a person fall asleep. There's also, for example, the Yerushalmi in Brachas. Yerushalmi brings down that if a person wants to fall asleep, they should say Shema, and they should repeat Shema over and over again. They should repeat the word Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, the entire first passage of Shema, the first pasuk of Shema, over and over again. So the Gra writes in Orach Chaim Samach Aleph 61, the Gra writes that the Gemara, the Bavli, tells us that you're not allowed to say Kol Shema Shema Mishtak L'Moisa. You're not allowed to say the word Shema twice, Shema Yisrael, because it sounds like Pira, it sounds like the opposite of Achdas Hashem, the oneness of Hashem. But if you say the entire passage, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, then you're allowed to do that. The Shalah Kodesh, Shai Levi Horowitz, the great Mekubal from Prague, and eventually in Eretz Yisrael, the Shalah Kodesh writes in Seches Chulin. The Shalah writes that If a person is lying in bed and wants to fall asleep, they should use what the Yerushalmi says to say Shema. They should see if they're falling asleep when they say the Shema. So at least the first pasuk. If that doesn't work and they're still awake, say again the Shema Yisrael Hashem Echad. So that serves a type of relaxation, a certain way to induce a state of sleepiness, and through the repetition of this sound. It's interesting that the Rambam in Hilchas Tefillah Perek Zayin, in the beginning, Halacha Aleph, writes that just like the brachas for many different things, we say blessings for many different things. The same thing also, that Kishikanas Adon Mitasei Lishon, when a person enters in his bed to go to sleep, they should say a bracha, they should say a blessing of Hamapil. And then the Rambam continues in Halacha Beis that when you're about to sleep, you should say the first parsha of Shema v'Hafta, and then but if a person is like very, very tired and they're lying in bed, they should say the pasuk Rishon, that's Shema Yisrael Hashem Echad, just say that verse and then enter into sleep. Or Psukei Rachamim, or they should say Psukei Rachamim. What is Psukei Rachamim? Verses of compassion. So Rabbeinu Menayach writes on the side that the Psukei Rachamim is, for example, B'yotcha Afkid Ruchi, which means I entrust my soul and I give it over to Hashem, which is very interesting. Just to pause for a second, because most people, and this is the way generally it's the custom is practice, is that first a person says Shema, and then when they're about to fall asleep, then they say Hamapil. And Hamapil said after Shema. And Hamapil, the prayer of Hamapil is that it should be a peaceful sleep, and it shouldn't have disturbing thoughts and bad dreams, etc. While I'm sleeping. There's a tinge of negativity in that state, and it actually creates bigger anxiety if a person wants to fall asleep that way. But biyad chafki ruchi means I return my soul to the Maker. That's a much more relaxing thought. And the Rambam actually has it in reverse, or we should say we have it in reverse from the Rambam, but the idea is that according to the Rambam, first you make the bracha and then you say Shema, which means you go to sleep saying Shema Yisrael Hashem Hashem Echad. You go to sleep saying the oneness of Hashem. And if the Rambam doesn't write this, but this is what we said from the Shalah and the Yerushalmi, even the Gar brings it down, the idea, and Mishabur also does, that the idea of repeating over Shema and Shema over a few times, sort of to induce yourself into a quieter state. So this is the idea of using sound. You can also use sound of nature, like we say. You can use sound with music, and in the book Sound of Music, Sound of Vibration discusses this in great length. You can also the idea of entrainment, which is the idea of synchronizing your internal rhythms, or let's say your pulse, the rhythm of your heart, the rhythm of your movement in your body, together with an external movement, or let's say with a wave, to slow down your heartbeat to the state of waves moving up and down. That's also a type of way to enter into a more quieter state. So this is general, a big conversation, which we see from many, many, many different sources, how they would use sound and repetition of sound to allow yourself to enter into higher states. Now let's read how the Baal Shem Tov uses all this in a very practical, in a very visceral and embodied way. So the Baal Shem Tov starts like this, and this is also from Kesser Shem Tov. When a person davens, when a person prays, they have to put their entire strength of being, which we spoke about in the previous weeks, their entire strength of the being into the words of davening, which means you enter fully. You're saying Baruch Ata, blessed are you. You're saying Baruch, and you're entering fully into those sounds. But then he says, V'yelech kach ma'ois la'ois ad sheishach megufnius. That you should go from letter to letter until the point where you forget about your physicality. Which means like that. It means exactly what we were saying before. That when you recite the words of davening, the words of prayer, the words of tefillah, let's say you're saying Baruch Ata, blessed are you, or you're the source of blessing, which is a better, more accurate translation. So when you're saying the words Baruch Ata, You have to enter fully into the words Baruch Ata, and you go from letter to letter. You don't start with words. We spoke that letters on their own is like the Dagel brings on the name of his grandfather, is Oisis is Beli Pirish. A letter doesn't have a particular meaning yet. So in the world of Atzilus, I think we spoke about this previously, in the world of Atzilus is the world of the Oir itself, the light in itself, which is infinite. The light itself is reflected into different vessels, and even in the world of Atzilus there is the 10 spheres. So there's the Oir, which is revealed in Chesed, and the Oir that's revealed in Gevurah. But it's a Chlifa D'Chtayo, which means that the Oir of Chesed, the light that exists within the vessel of Chesed, can be put in the light of Gevurah, and the light of Gevurah can be put in Chesed. It's just from the vessel's perspective, from the external perspective. It's almost like you take water, which is a metaphor that the Ramak brings down from Moshe Kadaver and the Pardos, and Tzemach Tzedek brings down Derech Mitzvah. The mashal, the metaphor of that idea is that you're pouring clear water into different cups. One cup is blue, one cup is red, one cup is green. Now, if you're looking from the external part, if you're looking externally into these cups, you'll see one water appears to be red, one water appears to be green, one water appears to be blue. But if you're looking from the perspective of the water, or you are the water itself, there's no difference if you're in a blue cup or in a red cup, which means it's the same exact color of the water, but to the external eye, when looking from the outside, it appears to be blue and red. That's the same thing also. That's v'hy in the world of Atzilus, it's he and his light is one, he and his vessels are one, which means is unity. In the world of Atzilus is just or. Then it becomes the world of Bria, which is the Chaymer, the substance. The substance of creation is the letters. Those are the building blocks of creation, the Avonim, like it says in Sefer Yetzirah. These are the letters. The letters are the blocks of creation. But Aleph in itself, not Aleph how it's pronounced, because Aleph, the way it's pronounced, is Aleph Lamed Pei, Aleph. But Aleph in itself is the sound, let's say. That doesn't have any inherent meaning, only when there's a tziruf, which is Olam HaYitzir, the world of formation, where there's a tziruf with an aleph and a base, for example. So an aleph and a base, aleph in itself is like a pocket of a particular quality of divine light, unlike in the world of Atzilus, which is all one. In the world of Bria, there's a divine light that's called an aleph. This divine light has a structure. It's, let's say an aleph looks like a yud on top, a yud on the bottom, and a vav in the middle. It has a sound. It has a numeric value. There's something that's called ginas eges, so it has gematria, has netrikun. It can be a beginning of a word. It has tmura. It can be exchanged with other sounds, other words. So it has a whole gamut of meaning, but it's very particular. And the aleph in itself has no inherent meaning, only if it's placed with another letter. When it's placed in another letter, which means the substance in itself there's substance to everything, but the substance only becomes a specific thing when it's formed with another letter. And that becomes a Yetzirah, becomes a formation. When it's formed with another letter, then it says Aleph Beis means Av, father, for example. Now, when a person is reading the letters of the letters of davening, and they come to the word, now this is a little bit in the reverse. A person is reading the letters, and you're starting off Baruch Ata. So your first intention, which is a very simple intention, is a simple pshat of the meaning. The simple meaning of the word Baruch Ata means you are the source of blessing. Okay, that's very simple. That's the world of Asiya, a kavanah, a very general intention. Or maybe even a specific kavanah prati, is a specific intention. That you're having intention, this is what the word means, it means you are the source of blessing. Okay. Then the Baal Shem Tov says what you want to do now is, in addition to that, you want to start connecting yourself with every single sound and enter every single sound with your entire strength of your being. Which that means, when you're saying the word Baruch, enter fully into the Ba, even though that has no meaning on its own. So you have intention before, the Kavanah comes before, which you said already previously. That's a very important part of the teachings of the Baal Shem and davening, is that Kavanah comes before the Dibur. The intention comes before the actual speaking. So when you're saying the word Baruch, Ba, enter fully into the word Ba, and enter fully with the entire strength of your being into Ba, and sound it out. The the intention, if you're having intention specifically on the word Baruch itself, it's possible that you can use what the Chazon Shel Magid and Avodas Yisrael writes in Parshas Truma. Naftoyer, he writes that you can mitzayir the ois. You can visualize, let's say, the bays of Baruch, and then close your eyes. Eyes open, eyes closed doesn't really matter. That's really depends. There's a full conversation about that, whether you pray with your eyes open or closed, and which parts of davening. Of course, it has to do with where you have more intention. So you have intention. You visualize the letter bays, and then you recite with all the strength of your being the letter ba, and you put yourself fully into that sound, and that has no inherent meaning. And then you say ru and so you're saying every single sound very slowly. And maybe an easier way to do this, even though the Baal Shem doesn't say this clearly, but this is possibly what he's saying, is that you can even take a breath in between. Like you inhale, and then you say ba. You inhale, and you say ru. It's like so you say baruch, or you can do baruch, like ba, inhale, and ruch as an exhale. So it actually means something. So you're entering fully into the sounds, and slowly you're doing this baruch, ata, Shem, Lakenu, and you're doing every single individual ois, and you're entering fully. That in itself, says the Baal Shem, is a way to forget about your physicality. What does it mean you're forgetting about your physicality? Like we said before, this is a type of way to induce yourself into a little bit of higher, more expansive state of consciousness where you're no longer focusing on, let's say, my foot's hurting or my mind is wandering at another place and I'm discombobulated, I'm not present. Just entering fully into the sound allows you fully to enter and to be present in the sound with the noichas pnei Hashem. You're standing in front of Hashem and you're sounding these sounds. The ba, the ru, the ah, ta. And every time you're entering fully, you're feeling yourself fully entering into those vibrational sounds, and you're feeling within your body, feeling the entirety of yourself. Then, so you're very present, and your mind is very engaged. In fact, not only your mind is engaged, your heart's engaged, your body is engaged, the entire self. What we'll see later, the Baal Shem calls askama sevarim, the consent of the entire body. The entire body is being present in the sound, and that's the definition of the sound. It holds you. It's like a focal point that's holding you, and you're being pushed into that place, gently being guided into that place. Then he says, that the letters start combining with each other, and that becomes a great pleasure. If this is true physically, this is also true spiritually. Certainly this is true spiritually. This is the world of Yitzir, this is the world of formation. Which means what you're doing is you're starting in the world of Asiya. If we spoke a few weeks ago that there's the Olam, Olamois, Neshamas, and Lakus. There's the world of singularity, which is the world of Asiya. Everything is separate from each other. The Bays, the Ba, and the Ruch are separate from each other. But you're entering fully into the Ba sound and then into the Ruch sound. This is just an example, okay? You can do this with any words of davening. The Gibor, whatever Shemon Esrei, or even you can do this before Shemon Esrei. When you're entering into it, you're entering into each individual sound as something that's separate from each other. But as you're entering it more fully, you're starting to not just sound them as ba, ruch, ah, ta, but slowly you start moving a little bit quicker, more inward, more quiet, less distractions in the mind, less distractions in the body, less distractions of the sensations that are coming up. And then from one particular sound, it becomes a word. The word of Baruch is now a redemptive process, and it's a unifying process, and that's pleasure. What is pleasure? And pleasure is a very tiny spiritual pleasure, highest level of pleasure, is a very important part of the teachings of the Baal Shem Tov, the teachings of Chassidus, how a person shall live with ultimate spiritual pleasure. But in very simple language, pleasure is paradoxically the absence of self into some, or the collapse of self into something that's greater than self. And that's the highest level of pleasure. So for example, let's use a very trite and a very mundane example. Let's say you love to eat, and you have pleasure eating. If while you're eating food, you're observing yourself eating, and you're dissecting exactly the taste or the texture of the food that you're eating, you're not fully involved in the pleasure. Or better yet, a more refined example is, let's say, music. If you're sitting and listening to beautiful music that gives you a tremendous amount of pleasure, if while you're listening to the music, again, you're observing the music, you're dissecting the music, you're saying the music has this, and it has this element and that element, and you have a whole philosophical understanding how the music is working and what it's doing, you're not really present in the music. Real pleasure of listening to music, or for example, eating, these are the mundane examples, is when you listen to music, you completely lose yourself in the music. And when you come out of the experience of listening to the music, or when the experience ends and you stop hearing the music, you say, what just happened? That was unbelievable. Because you lost your sense of self within something that's greater. That's what it says in Sefer Yetzirah is there's nothing hard than oining with pleasure. The pleasure of losing self in something that's transcendent of self, and that could be physically intimacy with another person. It can be in music. It could be in art, and of course, the highest level of pleasure is in spirituality, and something that in itself is Ein Sof, is infinite, and doesn't have form. So it's the loss of form within the world of the formless. That's the greatest pleasure. Dissolving the self into the higher self, into the ultimate self, which is the highest form of spiritual pleasure, which is the highest pleasure. So pleasure comes from unity. Pleasure comes from things that are combined and connected. And that brings a tremendous amount of pleasure from unification. So the Baal Shem Tov says, if this is true in the physical world, that all pleasure of this physical world, the more you're connected to it, the more you're absorbed within it, the more pleasurable it is, because it's creating a greater yichud. But that's something that has already a definition. So even if you're losing yourself within something else or somebody else, the other person or the other thing that you're losing yourself into it also is finite. So it also has a context. It also has a finite constitution, a parameter, a certain structure. So yes, you're losing your small self into something that's even a bigger self, but also has a definition. So it's not the ultimate form of pleasure. The ultimate form of pleasure, so that's a glimmer of the pleasure, or that's a tainug that fell, a shviras tainug. But in the highest level of pleasure, the ultimate pleasure is the loss of self, or of finitude, in the world of infinity, the loss of form in the world of formless, the loss of physicality within in the world of spirituality and divinity. That's the ultimate form of pleasure, because it's dissolving of the self. So Baal Shem Tov says, so we always know whatever is physically pleasure, it's a kol shekain. Certainly this is true on a spiritual level of pleasure. So pleasure is when things become mitzdaref, things become together. So when you start off with one particular sound, ba, ruch, and you're fully entering into it, and then slowly and naturally and organically, which is very important to understand this process, because ultimately this is a very important point. Ultimately, you have to get to a point where there's a complete dissolve of self. And to intentionally seek ayin, to seek nothingness or emptiness, to seek the absence of self, is a contradiction in terms. It's an oxymoron. You cannot seek the dissolving of self, because there's always a you that's seeking. So the only way you can actually enter the state of Atzilus, which is the unification of self within the transcendent of self, and we're going to get even higher than that, because there's even a level of the fifth level, which is Yechida, which is Ak, Adam Kadmon, which is again the re-emergence of self, of small self within the greater self, the small I within the greater I. But let's start with this process. Is you can't force the process. It also you have to slip into that state of consciousness. You can't push yourself to be nothing, or to enter into a state of nothing. Because by definition, it's you that's trying to enter into nothing, and you still exists, so the ego still exists. So therefore, the path of the Baal Shem Tov and the path of all spirituality is that there's no kfiyah, there's no force. It cannot be done by force. It cannot be. It has to be done almost like from a different direction, moving from another place. So you're moving into one place, and by being in that state, so you slip into another state. So, and that's why the Baal Shem Tov says this many times, and especially the students of the Baal Shem and the Chayzim, that the Klal Avodas Hashem is struck in Klalim. The great principle in the service of Hashem, in divine service, is that there's no principle. And even this principle is not a principle, because every time, every moment, every day, every moment, every time, every day, and every moment of the day is completely different. Every single day you have different challenges. Every day you have different things arise. You can't say today I'm going to daven because in this particular way, that's exactly the way I davened yesterday. Well, yesterday was yesterday. You can't even daven you can't even say I'm going to daven mincha today, the afternoon prayer, just like I did in Shachris. Shachris was daven one way because that's what you're feeling, that's what you're being in that one way. Like the Arizal says, every day is new kavanas, new intentions, and the Baal Shem Tov says every single day is new machshavas aros. There's also new struggles with new thoughts that come into your mind, and this is true. So this is something we have to understand. There's no this is exactly the way, but this is sort of the way, sort of the outline of the way it could be done, and every person has to tweak it according to their own state that they're existing in and the state of consciousness that they're operating in when they're davening. So in this process, you enter fully into the sound, each particular sound in its own, and slowly slip into this place where the oises start to mitzdarf zubezuda. The letters start combining with each other, and combination is the world of Yitzir, which is things already formed. So Aleph and Beis together are not just sounds of Aleph and a Beis, but the Aleph and a Beis, now there's a tziruf, there's a unification, there's a blending of these two letters, and now it says the word Av. So Ba, Ruch, the Beis as an individual ois, the Ruch as an individual ois, an individual letter, and the Reish Vav Ches as an individual sound or individual letter, are now this Amtakas Adin is a sweetening of judgment, because now the letters are not dead letters that are separate, each sound is separate from each other, but now the sounds come together and actually makes a word. And that creates that in itself creates a pleasure, creates tainug, which that means experientially what this means. And this is what the Baal Shem Tov says. This is the world of Yitzir. This is the inner world of Yitzir. The inner world of Yitzir, which is also, according to the world of angels, the world of singing, and the world of passion, and the world of desire, and the world of pleasure, is when a person starts with saying with the letters themselves, and slowly as they're saying the letters themselves, they start moving into creating words. And the words that induces a person to a very pleasurable state. It's almost like you're creating music. You're creating a tune, you're creating a nigun, you're creating a sound. So Baruch Atah Hashem HaKadosh Melech Haolam. That's very different than Ba, Ruch, Ah, Ta. Very different sensation. One, you're entering fully. There's a lot of concentration to enter into there. And then the next one is like a relaxation that you're entering into this, and it's like a pleasure that comes over you, a divine pleasure, a pleasure of dveikus that comes over you, where you're entering into the place that you're creating these beautiful sounds, these beautiful harmonious sounds of tzirufim, these type of combinations. And you sort of start singing the davening. The davening starts singing from you. And the words are starting to flow organically and naturally and very easily flowing off it's shagur b'fiv, like Chazal say. It's easy to say them. They're passing through your mouth. And that's the world of Yitzir. That's the inner world of Yitzir. So it's very pleasurable, very emotional, very opening, and very spiritually connected on an emotional level. And as a person is davening, so one way to do this is the way it is suggested. It's brought down in Yisai Cheresh Avoid. It's not only Chassidic sources, many Chassidic sources, but also in non-Chassidic Yisai Cheresh Avoid, which is the early time the Badabitcher gave a scholar for the Sefer, for this book. Yisai Cheresh Avoid is brought down Mishnah Mordech of Chaim, and many tzaddikim bring down that a person should only say 3 words at a time. So if we're doing it this way, it would be Ba, Ruch, Ah, and each one time inhale and saying the words fully. And then after a while, it's an intention, Kavana, Baruch Atah Hashem. Elokeinu melech haolam, shakali b'dvar. That would be like a way to do that. So you're saying you're having intention what the next three words are going to be, and pleasurably and effortlessly, with a lot of joy and passion, to just flow out the words Baruch Hashem, like the harmonious sound creates that pleasure. So Baruch Hashem, every three words, and you say it. The intention and say it. Intention and say it. It should be said, of course, that if you're going to do this for the entire davening Shemoneh Esrei, or entire davening, this may take you the entire day. And a levai sheis palal kolam kulay. Levai, the person should daven the whole day. But if a person doesn't have the time, at least try to do at least the first bracha of Shemoneh Esrei, which is very important. Or at least on Shabbos or Yom Tov, time that a person has more time to daven, to try to practice this at least a little bit, at least for the first one passage. And the Baal Shem is saying you're going to go from the world of Asiya, by saying every single letter individually, to the world of Yitzir, where you're creating those harmonious sounds, and you're saying three words at a time. As you're entering fully deeper within yourself, this is almost like a parallel we have in the Beis HaMikdash, that there are four places in the Beis HaMikdash. This is the most outer chamber. And then there's the Azar. This is more interesting where the Mizbeach is, Mizbeach HaChitzon, which is louder. And then you go into the Kodesh, which is the holy, which is quieter. And that's Avodas HaKohen, the Avodah Levim of the Levim was outside in the Azar, which was singing. There were shir, and there was Avodah, which is the Avodah is the idea of shir. That is min haTorah. They have to sing shir. They sang songs and they play music, which is loud, and then which is Avodas Levim. Then you enter into the Kodesh, into the holies, and that's a little quieter. There is a Mizbeach, but it's a Mizbeach HaKtoros, and the light the menorah. So you're entering into a quieter space. That's the world of Olam HaBriah. That's the world of creation. As you're entering deeper, more inwards, it becomes more quiet. And the quietness is not only a quietness of the external, which means that you're hearing less of the noise of the external world. It doesn't necessarily mean that people are not making noise around you. It's possible that, but even if people are making noise externally around you, you're entering into a more pneumius state, into a more internal state, and the noise becomes quieter and quieter, the external noise, and also more importantly, even the internal noise becomes quieter. So less machshavas, less intruding thoughts, less sensations, less physical urges, less physical distractions. You're entering into a quieter, more inner place. That's the world of Bria. So as you're davening, you start off with all your kayach, with all your strength. You're saying the letters very strongly, with power, with strength. Whether you say it loud, very loud, or quietly, that's, again, every person has to figure themselves out and figure where they're davening, when they can do this and when not. For example, Chaim Vital writes that the result daven very, very quietly. It seems from the teachings of the Baal Shem Tov that his students write that most times the Baal Shem Tov actually did daven quietly. Sometimes he daven loudly. It depends. So it's not so clear. And every person really yadish benafshe. Every person has to do it according to how they fit. So first you enter fully into the letters, and let's say you're a more quiet person, to do it quietly. Then you're creating the music, the taining, the world of Yitzir. They're creating the stringing letters together to create words. That's the Olam HaBriah, Olam HaYitzira. And then again, V'achar Yavoi, you come to that place. It's not you force yourself into that place. All of a sudden you're coming to the world of machshava, to the more inward world, where letters appear in the world of thought. And you're still speaking the words of davening. But you're not hearing anymore. You're not conscious that you're speaking these words, but also you're not hearing. Everything becomes more quieter. You're into a much more still place. That's the world of Bria. Then, says the Baal Shem, a person slips, not consciously, not forcefully, not that you intentionally try to enter it, but Yavoi, a person comes to the level of ayin, of nothingness, of emptiness. Every physical, all the capacities of his physical strength leave him, which means experientially that means you don't feel your body at all any longer. and you don't feel any of the noise that's going on around you, and you don't feel any of the noise inside. You're in a place of total immobility and stillness. And that's the level of ayin, of nothingness, of emptiness of all form. You completely dissolve as much as humanly possible, of course. You dissolve within a consciousness of this, of no longer separation, where the self becomes completely immersed in the ayin of the Ein Sof, of the world of Atzilus. And you're in a place of total stillness. And like the Magid teaches on this teaching, which is an important part of this teaching, that it doesn't mean that you stop davening in that state. It doesn't mean that the words don't come, they're not passing through your mouth. They are. That you're still saying the words to project reality. In the state of ayin, you have to still project reality to create the vessels, to bring down the blessings that you're trying to create through davening. But over here, it's almost menafshi kara, like Chazal say about moedim, is a state where a person bows on its own, which means the body is so in sync with what's going on a very deep level, what's going on in the state of your consciousness and your soul, that the body just responds. So almost to say it, it's not exactly the same thing, but it's almost like an automatic speaking. Your words are just coming through you. And as Hashem tiftach fi yagit elasecha, like the Maggid says, Hashem, open my mouth and you speak the words through me. Which you said is the idea of the Shekhinah resting upon the mouth. So the words is going to pass through my mouth, and that is Olam Atzilus. That's the world of Atzilus. That's the world of unity, experientially, inwardly, what we're experiencing in the world of Atzilus. And that's the Midas HaChachma, that's the level of Chachma, of higher intuition, higher wisdom, where in that state, a person davens and projects the most pure and holy and wholesome ideas that have to be expressed in this world. And then when a person comes out from Shemona Esrei, hopefully he's able to go from that state, or she's able to go from that state of being in a place of Atzilus to enter into this world in a holy, in a transcendent way. So that's basically the process. Again, so you enter through first sound fully, entering fully the sound. The sounds induce you to a quieter state, a more focused state. Your mind is more conscious and alert and present. Then it starts moving into more sounds that are created through streaming together the sounds themselves to become like words, become like a song. It becomes more subtle, more inward, and you become quieter and quieter, both externally and internally. The words are projected outwardly, but they're also becoming quieter. You're not hearing any longer what you're saying. And certainly you're not consciously hearing what you're saying, even if you are saying it loud, but you're not consciously aware of what you're saying. And then the words are just coming through you. And that's the world of Atzilus. So this is a way that the Baal Shem Tov revealed that which is applicable to every single person, that you can do this. Every single person can do this if you just try, just by saying the words of davening with the intention we spoke about in the last few weeks, with the oilam is shamas alikus, where the person has to do a yichud and recognize the interconnectivity with everything, and every single thing has a soul, and really in essence the Zayin Mavad is only Hashem's presence in this world. And a person does the yichudim first with this unification, tries to connect itself with everything, then starts davening this way. We can daven, we can pray from the highest, holiest place. Everyone should have a beautiful, beautiful week.